I really thought my previous video on this subject was going to be the last video of this subject, and turns out that's not the case. And this is why. There was a 77-page report that some news reporters got their hands on, and it adds a little more information to the story. It doesn't really change anything, but there's a little more to talk about. Apparently on this day, the temperature started at 76 degrees. Now, 76 degrees really isn't that cool. It is if you're hanging out in the backyard, but not if you're hiking. I mean, I went out this weekend and it was in the 50s and I still sweat a little bit. Within 3 hours, it would soar to 99 degrees. And by that afternoon, it would peak at 109. Now, what's not clear is what the temperature was when they went down. So that part we don't know, but it's still pretty hot. And because of the 2018 Ferguson fire, it had burned off the tree canopy that would have provided some shade. Yeah, I did know about wildfires in there and the lack of shade that is not present back in those trails. I'm going to be very careful to avoid sounding judgmental about their decision making, since they're obviously not here to speak up for themselves. I will say this summer in California has been brutal when it comes to heat waves. On a number of occasions would I check the weather report and it would say high in the low 90s. Okay, that's hot, but tolerable. And then you get around 2, 3 in the afternoon and you're like, what the hell? And you check it again and the temperature's 106. I've never experienced so many heat waves in this part of California ever since moving here 12 years ago. Usually you get like, 2, maybe 3 days or like windows, like 2 to 3 day windows where it gets well over 100 and it's just really uncomfortable. This year has been like nearly every weekend. Like we would get 104 to 106 degrees for a good 3 or 4 days straight, and then it would drop to 94, 95 for like 2 days, and then it's back up again. It was just relentless this year. So let's move on and talk about the dog a little bit. The dog apparently was an Aussie Akita mix. Akitas are really cold weather dogs. They have a very, very dense coat. This is a breed that would suffer a lot in temperatures like that. I mean, most dogs would anyways. This is definitely one of those breeds that would suffer more than others. Apparently the woman had been carrying a 2.5 liter Osprey Hydraulics water bladder and only had a few remaining drops left in the bladder. And this apparently was the only water they brought with them. Now, for hiking in those conditions, experts recommend 320 ounces of water for an adult couple, 160 apiece, with 16 ounces each for a baby and a dog. 2.5 liters is about 85 ounces roughly. One quote by a survival trainer said, "Sadly, I believe they were caught off guard, and once they realized their situation, they died trying to save their child and each other. It is likely the child began to succumb first, which hurried up the parents' efforts up the hill. When one could no longer continue, they stayed behind to care for the child and pet, while the other tried to forge on and get help for the loved ones. It is a tragedy of the highest order." If you remember in a previous video I did about this, where I covered the terrain using Google Earth, so we had seen visually how steep that climb was. It was a literal uphill battle to survive. And yeah, I was definitely wrong when I doubted that it was heat. So I admit that. Yeah, it's really unfortunate. I've tried to avoid being very critical of this couple. I don't know them. I don't know how they were preparing for this hike. I don't know what happened on the hike. I wasn't there with them. And they're obviously not here to speak in their own defense. So I've been trying to be careful about how I word things. However, I won't be careful how I word things for people I personally know, like my partners, adult kids. They're the typical early mid-20s, so therefore they know everything type. And all of us in our 40s and 50s who can look back 20, 30 years ago at ourselves, we know the mentality that we're dealing with. A little bit independent, extremely stubborn, can never admit that they're doing something wrong. They love being spontaneous, right? I'm so spontaneous, and by spontaneous it means they don't research a hike before they do it. They don't check the distance, they don't check the elevation, they don't check the difficulty, they don't check to see if the trail's even open. They don't bring water more than one occasion. They've needed people to give them water on the trail. They did that to me one time in Yosemite. I took them to Cathedral Lakes, and the daughter brought a 12-ounce bottle of water. Lucky for her, I had a life straw. So then I get her a life straw for a Christmas, about a year later. And then she would plan hikes by saying, well, I have a life straw, I'm fine. It's like, oh, that's cute. Did you look to see if there's a water source to use it? Oh, yeah. So there's a difference. There's a fine fucking line between being spontaneous and being reckless, okay? Spontaneous is just waking up and saying, I'm gonna go for a hike today, right? But before you leave that hike, you check the trail conditions, you check the weather, you make sure it's open, you make sure that you have water. If you're not bringing water, you make sure you have a filtration device and that there are locations to get water from. You know, there's still planning. Not planning is not being spontaneous. That is being stupid. So I'm going to send this to those adult kids, but I don't think it's going to sink in. And unfortunately, it's probably not going to sink in until one of them ends up a heat casualty, because they've been very, very reckless and they refuse to listen to someone who's been doing this since before they were born. It's very infuriating. And I certainly don't want anything bad to happen to them, but I'm afraid something's remotely bad is going to have to happen before it sinks in. So that's just a personal event. I'm tired of people throwing around spontaneous and not realizing you're not spontaneous. You just have your head up your ass. All right, there's a difference. And I'm going to say about them, they have their heads up their ass. They may be intelligent, but they're also young and stupid. So, but I'm not saying that about the Mariposa family, because I don't know them, and that's unfair, and it'd just be a real asshole thing to do. So, again, to their loved ones, I'm sorry for your loss. They seem like fun people, and it's a very unfortunate mistake. And I think as the heat continues to worsen in California, we might see more of these incidents. Unfortunately, I hate to say it, but this is a very popular state for the outdoors, for hiking, for active people, and I think we're going to see more in the future. Be careful. You can be spontaneous, but pull your head out of your ass and at least prepare responsibly. Okay? Please? Thank you. All right, that's all I got for this video. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you again next time.